All right, class, 3 weeks left in the semester. This week, you are working on your persuasive speech outline. Next week, you're practicing. And at the end of next week, you'll be giving your presentation of your persuasive speech. And I'll talk about this a little bit later in today's lecture, you want to make sure that you really look at that persuasive speech, that final presentation, as if it were your final exam. You'll still have one speech after that, the farewell speech, but that's just a short little speech, very similar to your introductory speech. Also, too, as we're nearing the end of the semester, you want to make sure that you take a look at your goals that you established for yourself at the start of the class, because what you're going to do at the end of the 8-week session, when you submit your final assessment, you're going to discuss how well you've met your 3 goals in order to determine your overall grade for the semester. So you want to brush up on those, and you want to make sure that you really demonstrate that you're meeting those goals in your presentation of the persuasive speech. Also, too, what I'm going to do today is my lecture at the end of my 8-week class, at the end of the spring semester, covered all the stuff that you need to know today to get ready for the persuasive speech. So I'm just going to cut to that lecture now. Keep working hard. You're doing a good job. Also on the informative speeches, I still have over half of those to grade. So if you haven't got your evaluation back on the informative speech, you should expect that in the next couple days. So I'll be working through those, getting those back to you as well. Also, too, the sooner you get your persuasive outline in, the sooner I can go over that, check that, get back to you in case there's anything that you need to fix to get that outline so it's ready to go. All right. Have a good week, you guys. Keep working hard. You're doing a good job. The finish line is right around the corner.
By and large, good job with the presentations, at least with the speeches that I've seen thus far. If I had one comment that most of us need to improve, and that would be our overall eye contact and having a nice conversational flow to the speech. Now, with the speeches that I've seen, I've been impressed with the fact that you know where to look. And so at least with the speeches that I've seen thus far, everyone has demonstrated, hey, I know I should be looking at the camera. That's my audience. What we want to do, though, is try to hold that gaze on the camera. In other words, try to hold our eye contact on the audience just for longer stretches at a time. So kind of the typical thing that I'm seeing is you'll start off a sentence looking into the camera. We're 2-3 words in, and then I get that quick glance over so we can finish the rest of the line. And we start the next line looking at the camera, but then we're going over here to finish, which is okay. We're just learning how to do this. But what I want to see in the persuasive speech, let's try to go longer looking into the camera, maybe get through 3, even 4 lines before we have to glance over at the notes. And that's just a matter of practice and getting familiar with your outline. The more familiar you are with the outline, the longer you'll be able to hold your eye contact on the audience. And so you just want to make sure that maybe you're increasing the practice reps, and that when you're practicing your speech, you're practicing effectively. I'll get into that a little bit more once we get into the persuasive speech. But when you practice your speech, always practice it out loud. None of this, I'm driving to work, I'm just kind of going through the speech in my head. Say the words out loud, because you not only want to get the line out, but you also want to think about how can I say each line so it has the most impact on the audience. And so that's kind of changing up and mixing up the rate and volume as we go from line to line in the speech. And so I always say, when you're delivering a speech, try to not say 3 sentences in a row all in the same vocal cadence. So you at least want to get to every 3rd line and mix up your rate, change up your volume. And one of the best ways to increase your vocal variety is learning how to incorporate pauses into the conversational flow, and just put them in different parts of the phrasing. You know, maybe in one phrase, you'll pause before you say the last couple words. Maybe in the next phrase, you'll pause earlier in the overall phrase. And then every time you follow up a pause, try to have a shift in your rate and volume. In fact, when you get to the persuasive speech and you have your outline written, go ahead and pick out what you think are the 3 most important phrases in that persuasive speech. Like if the audience only were to remember 3 things, what would those 3 things be, those 3 phrases be? And then highlight those. Then when you're practicing your delivery, set up that line with a little longer pause. I call a 2-beat pause. That's where you go 1001, 1002 in your head before you deliver the next line, and then change up your rate and volume. This works really well, especially when you're using information following a source citation. For example, it could be, and according to an article in Time magazine by Joe Smith on February 2nd, 2021, over 8 million people have died in the last decade. So see, I kind of changed that, kind of lowered my tone, softened my tone, slowed down the rate so I can make that line stand out even more. So when you're practicing your speech, make sure you're practicing effectively. Each time you run through the speech and you say it out loud, try to work on a different delivery skill. And I would say, because a lot of you, you're up close like this when you're delivering the speech, so kind of gestures and stance don't even come into the equation. Now you really want to focus on utilizing your voice even more effectively. So you want to make sure to improve your delivery, practice your speech more so you can hold your eye contact on the audience for longer stretches at a time, and that's all a result of practicing your speech over and over and over again. I would say if you really want to have an effective speech, a minimum of 20 repetitions. I've gone through my speech out loud 20 times, and that sounds like a lot, but if you just split it up, so you're practicing your speech 3 times a day, and you're saying your speech out loud, you can do it back to back to back, and really we're talking about 30 minutes a day of practice. And you're not trying to memorize the speech, you're simply, through the process of repetition, retaining more and more information. Repetition is the key to retention, So the more times you say something, the more likely it is that you'll remember that information. But overall, very pleased with the informative speeches. You guys are doing a good job. If you want to get an A in the class, you want to make sure that you've completed all of your assignments. You want to make sure that you have met your 3 goals that you established for yourself for this class in that introductory video at the very first week of the 8-week session. And you want to make sure in the persuasive speech, which really is like your final exam, that's your last chance to really demonstrate, look at me, here's what I've learned about public speaking. Even though you will have a short farewell speech at the end of the semester, the persuasive speech is your last big, what I call academic presentation. And so to get an A in the class on that last big presentation, you've got to have your outline done perfectly. You want to make sure that your source citations, and you have at least 4, and you have all the ingredients of a source citation for a speech, title of the publication or the name of the website, the author, and the date. And you want to make sure in your presentation that you're maintaining eye contact with the audience at least 50% of the time. That's really going to indicate that you understand the importance of practice and preparation when it comes time to deliver a speech. So you want an A in the class, meet your goals and meet my goals. And remember, you have a say. You get to negotiate for your grade at the end of the semester. That's the last thing you'll turn in will be your final assessment. But basically, you're going to argue for the grade that you think you deserve. So final grade's right around the corner. Let's really do our best work in this upcoming persuasive speech. And I think one of the ways to do that, you want to make sure that you stay on track. You get your topic turned in tomorrow. You have your outline done by the end of the week. And then you spend all of next week just practicing your speech. Another good way to practice before you record it, see if you can practice your speech into somebody else, right? You know, mom, dad, brother, sister, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, even the dog, right? And dogs are great audiences, right? They'll sit there and kind of nod their head and wag their tail. Don't try a cat, though. They'll just run off. They couldn't be bothered. But if you can practice in front of others a couple times, that's going to make that delivery even better. So final grade's around the corner, and I want you to all be successful. I'm for you. I want to give you the highest grade I possibly can, but you've got to show me that that's the grade that you've actually earned. Okay? Last thing today. Let's talk about the persuasive speech coming up. So as I just mentioned, topic proposals are due tomorrow. And remember, with the persuasive speech assignment, you have two different kinds of speeches you can do. You can do either the behavioral persuasive speech or the attitudinal persuasive speech. So make sure when you submit your topic proposal, you indicate whether it's a behavioral persuasive or an attitudinal persuasive. And with the brainstorming on the persuasive topics, where I had you guys indicate attitudinal or persuasive, you're all doing a pretty good job on understanding the difference. Just remember, look at your topic, and if the topic is an issue that most people would agree on, that this is a problem, this is an issue that needs to be fixed, works better as a behavioral persuasive speech. If you're looking at a topic and it's more an issue of controversy, there's two sides to the issue, you're taking a stand on one of those sides, that would be better as an attitudinal speech. So just for example, let's say that you want to do your persuasive speech on the subject of depression. And so if you look at depression, most people would agree that depression is bad. It's something that needs to be fixed. And so the focus of the speech is, how do we get people to take action to solve the problem of depression? Right? So that's clear behavioral speech. I don't recommend doing a speech on drunk driving. And when it comes to topics and persuasion, you want to have a sense of novelty and uniqueness to your topic, because if you're just doing your speech on a topic everyone's familiar with, right, there's very little persuasion that's going to take place. So, we all know that drunk driving is bad, and I doubt that you'll tell us anything in that kind of speech where I didn't know that. But that is an example of a topic that would be a behavioral persuasive speech, because most people would agree that driving drunk is a problem. It's something that we need to cut down on. It's something that we actually need to solve. So you've got to make a decision as far as whether it's a behavioral persuasive speech, attitudinal persuasive speech, and if I think maybe the other kind of speech will work after the topic proposal, that gives me a chance to intervene and maybe get you pointed in the right direction. And some topics can go either way, depending on your overall focus of the speech. And then last thing, if you're doing a topic that is an attitudinal persuasive speech, when you submit your topic proposal, be sure you write it out as a statement. Never write a topic out as a question. And that's my fault. I should have mentioned that earlier in the semester. And the reason why is, if you just write your attitudinal persuasive topic just as a question, then we don't know the stand that you're taking. So let's say you submit your topic proposal as a question. Is Kendrick Lamar a more socially significant rapper than J. Cole? Right? Well, that doesn't indicate the side. So when you submit the topic proposal, submit it as a statement, because that will indicate your persuasive intent. So it could be, Kendrick Lamar is a more socially significant rapper than J. Cole, or J. Cole is a more socially significant rapper than Kendrick Lamar. So attitudinal, make sure that you write out your topic proposal. When you write the topic, make sure you write it out as an actual statement. Okay? Last thing before we go on the modules and we start looking at the outline for the persuasive speeches, I just want to say a word about research. Research becomes even more important once you enter the realm of persuasion. And what's so important with persuasive speaking, you want to have the best evidence possible to support your argument. So when you're doing your research, don't just try to find sources as fast as you can so you get the assignment done. Because if I can attack your source, let's say that you use a source, but it's just a random website. I don't know who said it. I don't know when the information was published. That's an easy way for me to discredit the argument that comes from that actual source. So the stronger the sources and the evidence, and the better the evidence sounds when you give the source citations, the stronger the overall persuasion, especially with the dates. You can't leave dates out, especially if you're using it to support some kind of statistical study. 84% did this, but if you don't say the year, we go, oh, maybe that was back in 1962. It's not an issue anymore. So you've got to make sure you get the dates in. If at all possible, we want to know who said it, and we want that person to be a credible source for that particular issue, and either tell us the name of the publication or the title of the website. Also, try to use published sources. Only go to websites as a last resort, especially when it comes to public speaking. And it's way harder doing the source citations when you're dealing with stuff online on a website, because sometimes they won't have the name of the person who's responsible for the information, and we don't know the date that the information was posted. So really try to rely on published sources first before you use online sources for a persuasive speech. Recency has potency. That means the most recent sources of evidence are the most powerful sources of evidence. So don't skimp on the research effort. Just think of it like you're getting research to buy a home, right? When you get to that point where it's like, okay, maybe you're already there, but okay, now I'm going to spend a bunch of money. I'm going to be paying this off for the next 30 years. I want to make sure that all the information I'm getting is correct. So you want to make sure you're using the best sources. You just wouldn't go to Indy Rand. Oh, let me go to Ask Jeeves and find out about buying a house. No, you want the best possible sources when you're making a decision like that. Treat public speaking the same way, especially persuasion. The best sources are the most powerful sources. Okay? All right. Let's go over the outline formats, and to do that, let's jump on the module. All right, so we're on this week's module. You'll actually be working on the persuasive speech the next 2 weeks. Topic proposal due tomorrow. You want to get your outline in by Friday, and then spend the next week practicing your speeches. And I really recommend, don't submit your speech early unless you really feel like you have it down. Use the time I'm giving you between submitting your outline and submitting the actual video to practice, 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 so you have your speech down so you can just nail that final delivery. And persuasive speaking by far is the most challenging kind of speech that you will ever give, right? It's more challenging to try to get people to behave in a particular way, or even to get people to think in a particular way. So you've got to utilize all of your tools if you want to have a persuasive impact on your audience. Also, too, on the module, I just want to draw your attention to the 2 sample outlines. So notice right here, you have the behavioral persuasive speech sample outline. So we're going to click on that. Here we see the actual outline. And notice too, introduction, exact same as the informative speech. But, and this is the behavioral persuasive speech, for your attention getter, if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech where you're trying to get the audience to solve a particular problem, a great attention getter is to begin with an actual real world story that you find in your research of somebody who's been adversely affected by the problem. Let's say that you're doing a persuasive speech on how we need to better protect our identity so we don't get our identity stolen. So, great attention getter would be start with the story of somebody whose identity was stolen and the consequences of that, right? Because if you can get us to kind of care and feel about the problem, even before you get to the actual topic, that's a big step down the path of persuasion. So with attention getters, especially with persuasive speeches, an actual story of somebody who was hurt by the problem you're going to address, great way to start a speech. Then you have your topic presentation, your topic sentence, just like you did with the informative speech. Also want to make sure that you establish your significance, and remember, first source citation is in the significance. And notice here with the source citation, I've got the date, the full date. It's an article in a newspaper, so it gets published daily. I've got the name of the publication and the name of the individual. But also, too, notice how short that is. So that's not a lot to remember. And anytime you're giving a presentation and you're citing sources, usually those source citations, especially if you're not relying on notes, are the hardest thing to remember. So you want it to be as short and as compact as possible so you can remember it more easily when you're delivering the speech, but it also makes it easier for the audience to remember when they're listening to the presentation. Then your thesis statement, and then with the thesis statement for persuasive speech, you want to make sure that you're doing two things in that thesis statement. You are presenting your intent as a speaker, which, if it's a persuasive speech, is to persuade. I don't want to see to inform. I don't want to see the word inform in any part of the persuasive outline. You're not here to inform. You may be giving information, but the goal of giving the information is to persuade the audience. So in a thesis statement, you want your intent. I'm here to convince you. I'm here to persuade you. And then you restate the topic again. And if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech, your main points are already set. Effects of the problem, causes of the problem, solutions to the problem. And we have that indicated here. I'm going to go a little bit more detail in this, but I want to compare this outline format generally to the outline format for the attitudinal persuasive speech. And here we have the solutions, and then conclusion a little bit different with the behavioral persuasive speech. That's because we're actually kind of using a persuasive pattern here that we're walking the audience members through as we end the speech. So you're summarizing your three main points. The visualization step is basically where you want the audience to look into the crystal ball, and you can either have positive or negative visualization. Positive visualization is if we all take action, now we can save thousands of lives in the next 10 years. Negative visualization is if we don't take any action, thousands of people will die in the next 10 years. So all you're trying to do is to get the audience to see that their action will have benefits or their inaction will have drastic consequences. And then right after that, you just go back up to the solutions. Pick what you think is your single best solution to the problem, and then just restate that solution step here in your final action step. Then end your speech. And again, great way to end a speech is refer back to the opening attention getter. And even better, if you began with the story of an individual who was harmed by the problem, now we can end this speech by saying, so if we just all would have taken action, little Billy would still be alive today. Something like that to really have impact. So good way to end a behavioral persuasive speech is refer back to the opening attention getter and that opening story that you began the speech with. Okay, I'm going to go over this in a little more detail, but let's go ahead and take a look at the attitudinal persuasive speech. And again, on the modules, it's right here, just a couple speeches below, the sample outline for the behavioral speech, attitudinal persuasive speech right here. Let's take a look at that. And with the attitudinal persuasive speech, you're basically using the same structural format that you use for the informative speech. The only difference is your main points should each be an argument that supports your take on the issue. So let's say that you're doing an attitudinal speech, the one I mentioned, Kendrick Lamar, more socially significant rapper than J. Cole. I want to make sure that here in my preview, here are three specific reasons or arguments as to why I believe Kendrick Lamar is more socially significant. And then I simply develop each argument as a main point. I want to make sure that I have at least one source citation to support that main point, and I want to have a transition that leads into the next argument. And little trick with transitions in an attitudinal persuasive speech. So typically with a transition, I will tell you, a good transition tells us the title of the main point we're leaving and the title of the main point we're going into. That's why with some of you and your outlines for the informative speech, here, for the first main point, you just had main point 1. No, put in the titles of the main point, because ideally you should be doing the body of the speech first. Now, when I write my preview, I just look at the titles of the main points already in the body of the speech. This also helps me to write better transitions. But when I'm writing a transition for a persuasive speech, I want to tell the audience the title of the main point I'm leaving, and then I want to say another reason why I believe Kendrick Lamar is more socially significant can be found in the second main point. And so I kind of restate my thesis in the middle of the transition, and then I tell the audience what the title of the next main point is going to be. So kind of a three-pronged approach to transitions for persuasive speech. Here's what we just talked about. That's the reason why my topic is accurate. My take on the issue is accurate. We'll see this even more as we look at the next argument. You tell the audience what that is. Okay? But essentially, with the attitudinal persuasive speech, you have three main points. The only difference between that and the informative speech outline is you're making actual arguments. And try to make sure that each of your arguments are independent of the others, meaning if I take out or I don't buy your first argument, your second and third arguments are still strong enough to support your thesis, to show that you've met your burden, that you've actually been able to prove what it is you were trying to prove with the attitudinal persuasive speech. And then in the conclusion, just a standard conclusion where you're summarizing your three main points, you're tying it back into your thesis statement, and then you're ending your speech by referring back to your opening attention getter. Okay? So the attitudinal persuasive speech, very similar to the informative outline. Everything's the same, just the content is different. All right. What I'd like to do now is to walk you through a behavioral persuasive speech, just to give you a couple tips on how you can really make that persuasive effort have the most impact on the audience. And to do that, I'm going to pull up another outline. All right, so this is another sample persuasive outline, just so you have like a third sample outline you could look at. And I was kind of going through my files the other day, and I came across this outline. This was a great speech. This speech, it's on teen gambling, actually won the national championship. That was a few years back. But anyway, this is a really good sample outline. So just a couple things I want to point out in the overall structure of the sample persuasive outline and give you a couple tips on how you can really make this strong. Already talked about the importance of the attention getter, and notice here with this attention getter, talking about a teenager who got in trouble because of teen gambling, goes into the topic sentence. When you're looking at the significance for behavioral persuasive speech, a good way to establish the significance is to establish how widespread the problem is. So if you're dealing with an issue and a lot of people are affected, that's a good bit of research or evidence to use in the significance, because now you can kind of make the argument to the audience. So chances are really high that sometime during your life, you or someone you know will be affected by this problem. So the more I can convince the audience that this problem affects them, the more likely they'll be able to, the more likely they will listen and then take action. So the significance is really important, and what you're really after right here is proving to the audience this could happen to you. The more they believe that, the more they'll be into the speech. And then your thesis statement: my purpose today is to persuade you that gambling is becoming a growing problem among teenagers, and something needs to be done before it spirals completely out of control. So you have my persuasive intent. My purpose today is to persuade, and then I clearly state what it is, the problem that we are trying to solve as a result of the speech. And if you're doing the behavioral speech, all your previews will sound something like today. I'll talk about the effects, causes, and solutions to whatever the problem is that you're addressing. And that's important. We're kind of walking the audience through the persuasive path that a lot of us go through anytime we go to the doctors, right? Usually you go to the doctor, I'm not feeling well, so you get in and get to see the doctor. What's the first thing the doctor wants to know? Okay, what's wrong? What are the symptoms? What are the effects, right? So in the effects, what you're doing here is you're trying to really bring out the physical manifestations that tell us that something is wrong, right? So you want lots of examples of this is widespread, it affects so many people, and in the effects, when you're getting the audience, and what you're really trying to do here is to get the audience to agree, oh my God, this is a problem. And the worse the problem is, right, the more you get that audience to feel like, oh crap, that could actually affect me. And if I get that, that would be terrible. The greater you get the audience to buy into the effects of the particular problem, the more likely they'll be to follow through on the solution. So the effects really important. And what you want here is you want a combination of facts and faces. A lot of times, we just get the facts, right? Here's the statistics. Here's how widespread it is. Here's where it may be happening. But audiences tend to care a lot more about people than statistics. And so you want a good combination of both facts and faces in the effects. So in the effects, always try to add a story, a real world story of someone who was affected by the overall problem. And the worse the impact, all right, the negative consequence, the more likely the audience will buy into, oh my God, that's terrible. We need to do something to stop that right now. So the effects, real important. Here's where you're convincing the audience that something is wrong. Here are the physical manifestations that tell us we've got a big problem on our hands and there's going to be terrible consequences for all of us. In the causes, now, this is a real key leading up to the solutions. Why does the problem exist? What are the causes? What are the reasons for the particular problem? And there's a logical connection between the causes and the solutions. So for example, let's say if a cause of a problem is lack of enforcement, right? We're not enforcing, we're not following through on the laws that we already have, then that automatically leads you to a solution of we need to have better enforcement, right? If a cause of the problem is we're not spending enough money on it, then a solution would be we need to spend more money on it. If you looked at the persuasive speech on identity theft, if a cause is too many people carry personal documents around with them, like in their wallet or purse, right? Then a solution would be we need to be careful about what we're carrying around on our person. So there's a logical connection. The causes will lead us to the solutions. And so when you put the solutions together, you want to make sure that you have a solution addressing each of the causes. That really tightens up the overall persuasiveness of the speech. And then, probably the most important thing I can tell you about a persuasive speech, a behavioral persuasive, where you're trying to get the audience to take action, you've got to give the audience things they can actually do. So in the solutions, we don't want a lot of, well, they need to do this, they need to do that. It's we. So you want to make sure you're tailoring the solutions directly to the audience that you're speaking to. So if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech, the people you're trying to convince and get to take action would be your classmates, me, those of us who are going to see your actual speech, who are going to watch your speech. You want to make sure that you see us as the persuasive target. Okay? A great example of that. Just a couple years ago, a student was giving a persuasive speech on water conservation. And one of the causes is that people just waste too much water without thinking about it. One of the solutions that the student came up with, take a bucket, put it in the shower, and every time you warm up the shower, have the bucket in there so the water goes into the bucket, and then you can use that water for other watering needs. I heard that. Hey, that's a good idea. I've had a bucket in my shower for the last 2 years. My water bill went down by about $50, just not by wasting water in the shower. And I just use all that water for all of my outdoor landscaping needs. So, great example of the connection between a cause and a solution. And that solution was practical enough. It was something that I, as an audience member, could actually do. I know a few of you are speaking about climate change. So, solutions to climate change give us things that we can actually do. And the more work you do in the solutions, the more likely the audience will follow through on those solutions. So let's say that maybe a solution is we just need to be more aware, so find a place where you can get more information, right? Well, that means that I, as the audience member, now, after hearing your speech, I got to do some research and figure out where to go. As opposed to, you just tell us a website or a document that we can read that will give us that specific information. You know, solutions to teen gambling. There might be a website that parents can go to get help. Tell us the name of the actual website so we know to go there. Again, the more information that you give us on what we need to do, the less I have to do on my own as an audience member to figure out a solution, the more likely it will be that I'll follow through on your solutions. And folks, treat this real world, especially with some of the topics that you're coming up with. I mean, look at your speech and really try to make a difference, right? If you're doing your speech on climate change, try to do the speech in a way that you can really do something about climate change, even if it's only, 20 to 25 people saving more water because they have a bucket in their shower, right? That still has an impact. You have made a persuasive impact. How cool is that? As a result of you speaking, people are taking action to make the world a better place. Pretty powerful tool, isn't that? Not getting that in every class you're taking. So if you want to be persuasive, understand the importance of what you're doing and the effects, causes, and solutions, and how they all work together. And kind of the same thing as the analogy I used about the doctor. You go in, here are the symptoms or the effects. Then the doctor tries to figure out the causes. All right, what's causing your nose to be runny? What's causing those headaches? And then solutions. All right, take 2 of these and you should be feeling better in no time. It's the same thing we're doing with the behavioral persuasive speech and our organizational pattern in the body of the speech. And then I went over the conclusion on the other outline, but again, in a behavioral persuasive, after you summarize your 3 main points, visualization step, all right? If you act, great, things are going to be really good. If you don't act, people are going to die. Restate your best solution step, and then end your speech by referring back to your attention getter. All right? Okay. So that should give you a lot of information so you can be successful in the persuasive speech assignment. On the attitudinal persuasive speech, you just want to make sure that you have 3 really strong arguments and good strategy with the attitudinal persuasive speech. I typically do this if I'm going to give one of these kinds of presentations. I'll have 2 arguments that support my take on whatever the issue is. But for the 3rd main point, and it depends on the topic, but I'm going to try to figure out what would be the best argument somebody could make against this particular speech. Like, what would be the biggest counter argument? I'm going to try to guess that, and then I'm going to have an argument or a main point that focuses on trying to discredit the argument that I think they're thinking about in their head. For example, let's say that I'm doing an attitudinal persuasive speech on why the United States needs to legalize marijuana federally. So in all 50 states, marijuana is legal recreationally. Now, I can anticipate that the pushback I'm going to get from the audience, well, isn't that going to increase drug abuse? So I might have a main point in the speech that says, and legalizing marijuana recreationally in all 50 states will not bring about an increase in drug abuse. In fact, it will do just the opposite, because now we can take all the money we spend on enforcing it and put it into education and to rehabilitation. So with the attitudinal persuasive speech, try to anticipate a counter argument and maybe have a main point that pushes back on that counter argument. All right? Last thing, with the attitudinal persuasive speech, you have a lot more freedom, obviously, because you get to come up with the 3 main points you'll use to support your take on the issue. If you have any questions about how you can do your very best on this assignment, or something that you don't understand, just send me an email. Have a good week, folks. Let's really put some work in to getting a good, solid, persuasive speech. Let's get those outlines done by the end of the week so you can spend all of next week practicing. I'll see you guys next week.